Hi, my name is Easton Lewis, and today I'll be discussing Chapter 11, which is the Law of Torts. At the beginning of this chapter, it describes what a tort is, and this is simply an injury to another person's or person's property or a civil wrong. The chapter continues with what a goal of the tort law is, and this is to compensate innocent persons who are injured or whose property is injured as a result of another's conduct. And it includes discourage private retaliation by injured persons and their friends, promote a justice society by forcing reasonable parties to pay for the injuries they cause, and to deter future wrongs. There are many types of tort damages. One type is a compensatory tort. And the purpose is to put the plaintiff in the position he or she would have been in if the tort never occurred. The amount is significant to cover all losses caused by the tort, including compensation for pain and suffering. The next type of tort is a nominal tort. This is to recognize that the plaintiff has been wrong. The amount that is caused is the nominal amount, which is usually $1 to $5. The next type of tort is a punitive tort, and this is to punish the defendants. The amount is determined by the severity of the wrong conduct and the wealth of the defendant. The chapter continues with the Class Action Fairness Act, and this transfers jurisdictions of a large multi-state class action tort suits from one state courts to federal courts. The class action cases fall under the jurisdiction of the federal courts if the aggregate value of the claims exceed $5 million. There are at least 100 class members. Any member of the plaintiff class is a citizen of the state different from any defendant, and 2/3 or more of the class members and primary defendants are not members of the state in which the action was originally filed. There's also the classification of torts that's discussed in this chapter, and this is 1, the intentional torts, 2, the negligent torts, and 3, the strict liability torts. Beginning with the international torts, this involves purposeful action that the defendant knew or should have known would harm the person, property, or economic interests of the plaintiffs. The categories include torts against persons, torts against properties, and torts against economic interests. The classification of international torts states, against persons is assault and battery, defamation, invasion of privacy, false imprisonment, and international infliction of emotional distress. Against property is trespass to reality, trespass to personality, and conversation. Continuing with the classifications of international torts, it discusses the against economic interests, and this is disparagement, international interference with the contract, unfair competition, and inappropriation. The assault and battery is also discussed in the chapter, and the assault is the international placing of persons in fear, apprehension of an immediate offensively body contact. Battery is the intentional, unwanted, and offensive body contact. The defenses for battery is self-defense, defense of another, defense of property. Next, the chapter describes defamation, and this is the international publication or communication to a third party of a false statement that is harmful to the plaintiff's reputation. The libel is discussed in this and is the publication of a defamatory statement in a permanent form, and slander, which is spoken defamatory statement. The defenses for the defamation is the truth, privilege, which is absolute privilege, the right to make any statement true or false about someone and not to be held liable for the defendant, and the conditional privilege, which is the right to make a false statement about someone and not be held liable for defamation provided the statement was made without reliance. Next is the privacy torts. This is public disclosure or private facts. This is unwarranted disclosure of the private facts about a person. Next is false light, which is intentionally taking actions that would lead observations to make false assumptions about the person. Next is the appropriation, and this is using a person's name or likeness for commercial gain without the person's permission. Next is the invasion of privacy, and this is encroaching on the solitude, seclusion of personal affairs, someone who has the right to expect privacy. Next, the chapter describes the international torts against property, and this is trespass to reality or trespass to real property, trespass to personality and conversation. The intentional torts against economic interests include disparagement, which is intentionally defaming a business, product, or services. Elements to provide the plaintiffs include the defendant makes a false statement or a material fact about the plaintiff's business, product, or service, publication, damages the reputation of the business, product, or service, and an actual economic loss. Next, the chapter describes the negligent torts. And negligence is failure to live up to the standards of a case that a reasonable person would meet to protect others from an unreasonable risk. The plaintiff must establish duty, which is standard or care that defendant owns the plaintiff, and also a reasonable person standard. And next is a branch of duty, which is the defendant's conduct was not consistent without the specific duty. Continuing with the negligent towards causation is described, and that is the actual cause, which determines if the defendant's conduct resulted in the plaintiff's injury. Proximate cause, which determines if the plaintiff and the type of injury incurred by the plaintiff were foreseeable. And the damages, which is defendant's actions must have resulted in some harm to the plaintiff for which the plaintiff can be compensated. Lastly, for the chapter is the strict liability torts. And this is when the defendant is engaged in an activity that is so inherently dangerous that no amount of due care can make it safe. The defendant is held strictly liable for any damages caused by engaging in such activities. And so, like I said, that's all I have for this chapter. I thought this chapter was interesting because learning about the types of torts and the classifications of them, and how they go within the law, and how they're proposed and the amount of damages it can cause was interesting. So I can't wait to continue on chapter 12. Thanks.